Okay, so to celebrate 14 years of bike racing, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm getting a little bit older. I want to put together my top 14 things. Basically, if I could get into a time machine, go back to Jeff from 14 years ago, grab him by the shoulders. These are my top 14 tips to prevent a decade of suckage. And the first one is, in bike racing, you have to enjoy the process because winning is super rare. Think about it. It's a unique sport in that you line up to a race with 50 other riders on average, something like that. That means all things being equal, you have a 1 in 50 shot of winning that race. So if you're a crazy person and race like every single weekend, that is going to be 1 win per season, which on one hand makes the wins really special, right? Because they're rare. But on the other hand, like, you have to prepare yourself for a lot of failures in this sport. You have to learn how to learn from those failures, and then you have to enjoy the process of progressing year over year. Okay, and the second one, sorry to disappoint, but gear is not as important as you think. I managed to make it to P12 on a pretty cheap aluminum bike. I thought gear was holding me back. Turns out it wasn't really. Like, when you're first starting out, the low-hanging fruit is make sure your training's on point. Make sure your nutrition is on point. Make sure you have a strategy. We're gonna talk more about those things a little bit later on in this list. But gear is like far from the top thing that you need to throw money at. If you have everything else dialed and you're really running up against your physical limitations and your diet is perfect, that's when gear starts to make sense. So your upgrades should sort of track your progression. As you upgrade your categories, you should upgrade your equipment. Another way to think about this is, can Tadej Pogacar beat me on a $200 aluminum bike and I'm on a $10,000 carbon bike? Absolutely, he would destroy me. Can he beat Jonas Vingegaard on a $200 aluminum bike? Probably not. So at a really high level of the sport, you start searching for those 1% gains. That's why these top level athletes go out and they do a altitude camp for weeks. They spend hours and hours on the bike in the base season just to realize like a 1% gain, because that's the difference. They've exhausted all other opportunities in order to get stronger, so they're really looking for marginal gains, and at that point you should seriously consider spending a lot of money on an expensive, lightweight, aerodynamic carbon race bike. And this is sort of a continuation of the second item, and that is the most important piece of gear I have ever bought is this Scott. No, I'm just kidding. It is a power meter, guys. Training with power, even racing with power, is a game changer. What it allows you to do is, first, you're going to train with intention. We're going to talk a little bit more about that down on the list, but also on race day, you're going to realize, oh man, like, I was too excited, the caffeine was flowing, the adrenaline was flowing, I was spending way too much energy. You can look at that now. With a power meter, that is measuring the exact amount of force you're putting into the bike. And oftentimes we just get caught up in, I'm just gonna go out and ride with my buddies, or I'm just gonna send this attack in the race. You don't realize the actual damage that's doing. And with a power meter, that allows you to train properly, which brings us into my next point, which is train with purpose. Junk miles are not making you faster. Sorry, I learned this the hard way because I did junk miles with my buddies for years. Don't get me wrong, it's fun. There's a place for that. If that helps motivate you to actually ride, go for it. But once you start training with intention, you are gonna see this big bump. I got a power meter in 2018. At the same time, I started structured training, and 2018 was my most successful season. I spent the 7 years before that, 8 years before that, banging my head against the wall trying to figure out why I wasn't winning races. Suddenly, my training went on to a new level because I was training with purpose. I had a plan. I stuck with it. If I can do it on like 8 to 10 hours a week, so can you guys. So we talked about training with purpose. What about racing with purpose? At any moment in a race, you need to ask yourself this question: what am I doing and why am I doing it? If you don't have a good answer, Houston, we have a problem. Like, you are not racing with purpose. You need to have intention behind every one of your actions on race day. And that is because, going back to what I mentioned about power, is your actions have consequences. You might not realize it in a race, but in a crit, we make 100 little decisions that all impact your performance at that critical moment. And I'm sure you guys know what I mean when I say critical moment. There will be a moment in the race where you see your competition riding away and you're like, I know I'm fitter than those guys. It's likely because they have made better race decisions up to that critical moment in the race where the breakaway gets away or the sprint is happening. You need to save as much energy as you can. And to do that, you have to race with purpose and ask yourself that question: what am I doing? Why? Always have an answer to that question. And my next one actually contradicts my earlier one, just a little bit, but don't get too hung up on power numbers. Everyone has a power meter these days. It's really easy to compare your power with a pro's power, or like the local P12 badass who has a crazy sprint, or whatever it is, because it's just one small component of success. I oftentimes beat riders who are objectively more powerful than I am. I can look at their power data. This is not my opinion. This is a matter of fact. I also lose to racers who are objectively slower or weaker than I am in terms of power numbers. So don't get too hung up on the power. Compare yourself with yourself and make sure that you are tracking in the right direction. You are always increasing, because once you start playing that game of comparing yourself with others, it's not going to end well. This goes back to my item number 1, which is you have to enjoy the process. Okay, next one, and I hate talking about this, but hey, we're being open, we're being transparent, is weight is important in this sport. I wish it wasn't, but people often associate weight with climbing performance because gravity. It makes sense. But it goes further than that. And I learned over years, it took me a long time to realize that weight is extremely important in crit racing too. And let me explain why. It's because force equals mass times acceleration, right? Newton taught us one of the principles of physics. If you can decrease your mass, you will increase your acceleration for the same amount of force. So what does that mean in a crit race? Well, if you just look at the data from any given crit race, it is like this sawtooth pattern of accelerations out of a corner, braking into a corner. And every single time that power spike goes up, you are accelerating. Now, if you are carrying around an extra, 30 or 40 pounds, you are gonna have to really do a lot more power in order to follow the rider in front of you. It becomes extremely important on really technical crits, on crits with a hill, obviously, but here's a big one. What about the sprint finish? Let's talk about that, because if you are a lighter sprinter, I have gone up against lighter sprinters where they can make a good amount of power, not this earth-shattering number, but let's just say they're a 150-pound sprinter who can make 1,200, 1,300 watts. That is more impressive than a 200-pound sprinter who can make 1,900 watts. And this is why, because when they accelerate, they get that little micro gap. And when you're going 35, 40 miles an hour at the end of a P1-2 crit, you need to have that draft. It's so important. So if you're a lighter rider and you can get that acceleration and open that gap, you're gonna win bike races. So I hate to say it, but weight is incredibly important in this sport. Okay, and that brings me into, we talk about weight, let's talk about when it's an appropriate time to try to cut weight. It is not during actual training rides. It is not during the season. It is during the off season, and it is during moments when you're off the bike. It is sensible decisions when you're not training, and it's a delicate balance. Let me just do a quick anecdote. I was working with this athlete a few years ago. He was doing incredibly well. His fitness was tracking. Every metric we were looking at was doing great. He was hitting these key workouts until one day he just wasn't. And I was like, what's going on? How's your sleep? How's your stress level? And finally we got to it. He was like, I was trying to cut weight, so I was really bringing my carb intake down during these key workouts. And I was like, no, you need those carbs because they're gonna allow you to hit those key workouts, which is incredibly important during the season. And that's the reason he wasn't able to complete his workouts. And yeah, maybe he cut a pound or two, but he lost a lot more in fitness. So I guess the take here is don't listen to me, hire a nutritionist. It's a delicate balance between performance and weight loss. And if you're really interested in going above and beyond, work with a nutritionist and seriously consider doing it out of the active race season, so generally in the winter months. And while we're on the subject of carbs, eat more of them. That is my next take. If I could go back in time and tell younger Jeff, eat more carbs. Because a lot of people, myself included years ago, get stuck in this mentality of, I only need to fuel hard workouts, or I need to fuel less during easier workouts. And that is completely untrue. I won't bore you guys with the numbers, but the bottom line is carb intake can never match the demand of exercise and cycling. Even at low intensities, like zone 2, you are burning more carbs than your stomach can take in. I'm gonna say that again. Even in zone 2 rides, you are burning more carbs than your stomach will physically take in. So eat more carbs. Start with 60 grams per hour of carbs, a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose. 2 glucose to 1 fructose is the balance that is best for uptake. Your mileage might vary. Also, you might be able to take more than 60. I would start with 60. I would start with 2-to-1. Listen to your stomach. You will have GI distress if the balance isn't right or if 60 is too much. Try to work your way up. Really high-performing athletes taking more than 100, to put that number in perspective. So don't start there. You'll get a stomach ache. But eat more carbs even during zone 2 rides. Seriously, listen to that one. That's an important one. And that brings us to number 10. I lied. I do not have 14. I have 10, apparently. And my last tip is have fun. That's what this is about. If you feel like, I don't want to go out there and grind anymore, then it's not going to last. Make sure you're having fun. If you have to upgrade your equipment in order to get the motivation, trust me, I have the same problem. If you have to get new tires, new wheels, if you have to ride with a new group, if you have to skip that hard training day with intervals to do a group ride with the buddies, that's better than doing nothing, and you don't want to burn out. So have fun, get motivated, go out there, and say hi, wave. I wave at cyclists all the time. They don't wave back. Don't be that guy. Stop if somebody's, struggling with mechanical on their bike, a flat tire or something. Have fun out there, guys. I'll catch you in the next one. Oh, and one more thing. If you guys like this format of me talking into a camera, I love doing these. I love connecting with the community. I love chatting with you guys. So drop a comment down below if you want to talk about a topic, if you want me to elaborate on something I covered in this video, and let's have a discussion. Meet me down in the comments. See you next time.